civil society, and UN agencies. She also has developed and expanded a program bringing companies, startups, and governments together to form partnerships that address national sustainable development priorities in a number of countries. So, Rosedale, over to you.
Very excited to be here, and I must say that today very much lived up to its name. I have walked away inspired, and that's not a small feat for someone who works around the world with companies on developing new technologies and new business models. Today, I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of the company's perspective because as the Global Compact, we work with companies. We're the UN arm that works with companies to engage them in responsible business practices aligned to universal principles in the areas of human rights, how companies come together with other stakeholders to evaluate disruptive technologies and new business models and build solutions that express their contributions to the SDGs. So what I wanted to share with you is a little bit about what companies are doing and how we're thinking about the SDGs broadly. So if we can have my slides. The most comprehensive articulation of human needs in the world, and thus they are your roadmap to creating long-term sustainable value for your company, for your shareholders and stakeholders alike. So what we try to do is nudge companies to move out of this CSR space because, as many speakers mentioned today, business as usual is not going to get us to the SDGs. So I share with you some research here that's been done by the Business and Sustainable Development Commission. Their report, Better Business, health and well-being. So when we look at where these opportunities stack up, and they've also found that in achieving the SDGs by 2030, that will also generate 380 million jobs globally. But that said, the Sustainable Development Goals are an exponential agenda. And why do I say that? Because when we look at many of the goals, whether it's goal 1, no poverty, or goal 2, no hunger, that requires the transformation of the state of billions of people around the world in short order. We have 12 years to get to the state of almost 4 billion people in poverty or no hunger down to 0. So the global goals are an exponential agenda, and for an exponential agenda to be achieved, we need really bold solutions. So that's part of our overarching narrative, where companies can play a strong role in creating this world of shared prosperity, a thriving environment, and peace. But they can't do it with business as usual. They really need to raise their sustainability ambitions, as all of us do. We need to raise our ambitions in what we seek to achieve. So when I say, what does raise ambitions mean for companies, that's where our work on breakthrough innovation comes in. So for companies to contribute to achieving that exponential agenda that the SDGs present, they have to reframe their conceptions of what's possible and engage in what we call breakthrough innovation. So breakthrough innovation for companies are aligned to 3 pillars. One is embracing new mindsets. So it's really thinking about, how do you make things 10 times better as opposed to 10% better? How do you love the problem, not the solution? So I think that also ties into some of the discussion we had at lunch in applying a gender lens to your innovation, rather than going into a community or going to a group of people with a pre-made solution, loving the problem so much so that you're immersed in the challenges, immersed in the opportunities, and you're co-creating with the end user of the solution. So then we look at designing and testing new business models, because in doing so, that accelerates the accessibility of the solution. And so we've done a lot of research on some of the key business model elements that are underpinning some of the disruptive technologies today. And then naturally, it's deploying disruptive technology. So taken together, this is the way that companies can accelerate their sustainability ambitions, as well as accelerate their contributions to the Sustainable Development Goals. So I wanted to share some examples with you of how companies are heeding that call of raised ambitions. So the Global Compact works with 9,000 companies around the world in 160 countries. And what we're seeing is that, first of all, this revolution in terms of raised ambitions, accelerating progress on the Sustainable Development Goals through the application of disruptive technology and new business models are entirely being led by startups. So many of the startups that you have engaged with in the room are leading that charge, and they are the catalyst for inspiration and raising the bar for what's possible for companies. So I introduced one startup to you, called Kimetrica, that's working directly on SDG 3 and is using artificial intelligence embedded in mobile phone applications to diagnose malnutrition in young children. And so, this is a huge challenge, and one of the things that is so striking about their work, and it leads to a broader trend that's happening, is this notion of AI in the streets. So AI not in a lab, but AI in your phone that helps to solve some really pernicious challenges. And so this company is using AI to help medical professionals identify and triage really acute cases of malnutrition in remote, underserved communities. And so the next company is a Global Compact company, and they had a really ambitious goal of addressing the challenge of the lack of affordable and clean energy around the world with the aim of addressing that group of about 20 million around the world that have no access to clean and affordable energy. And what they've done is paired data, IoT, Internet of Things rather, big data, with battery storage technology, and have built a mini grid and have started to deploy it in rural parts of Colombia to generate clean energy and pair it with a business model, a usage-based pricing model to make the access to energy much more affordable. So when we talk about disruptive technologies, there aren't anything without the business models to expand the access. And then finally, see, once again, the technical difficulties always follow me because I was sure my slides were formatted really well. But that said, another company based in Portugal, an engineering firm that focuses on autonomous mobility, is looking at a blockchain-based low-carbon mobility system. So globally, around 15% of greenhouse gas emissions come from transport systems. So what they're doing is basically developing a blockchain-based token called the Air Credit to promote the use of low-carbon transport systems. So riders that use this system actually get credits for the CO2 that they have avoided, effectively putting a price on carbon. And if anyone has read one of the IPCC report that has come out, one of the solutions that is really going to help us accelerate progress on combating climate change is carbon pricing. So I wanted to share those examples with you to really inspire and to say that all of us in this room, whether we're companies or organizations or city or representatives of policymakers, have a few things to do. And one thing is to collectively raise our ambitions as to what is possible. So not letting today's constraints limit future solutions. And I want to leave you with just a few calls to actions and a summary. So as I mentioned, the SDGs are the roadmap for the world's needs, and they give all of us an unprecedented opportunity to support the creation of a world with shared prosperity, peace, and to reverse environmental degradation. They're also an exponential agenda. So that said, exponential challenges require bold solutions. And these solutions can be high-tech or low-tech. The idea is that, as I mentioned, we need to raise our ambitions. And then finally, where many companies, especially startups, are heeding the call, deploying new business models, disruptive technologies, and solutions that really are going to progress the SDGs. So when in developing the solutions, I like to tell companies to look at this AP squared model, which is be anticipatory. Use the SDGs as the problem statements that you will solve for. Make the development of your solutions participatory. And in showing that you're including the end users or the people who will be most impacted by the solutions. And then finally, be principled in your approach to development. Look at how your solutions impact or impinge on human rights, on anti-corruption efforts, environment and labor, and seek to minimize those impacts while maximizing the positive ones. So thank you so much for this opportunity to speak today, and I look forward to the innovation revolution for the SDGs continuing.
Do I need to point this in a certain direction? Sorry? Ah, perfect. Ooh, can we do the screen views so we see one at a time? Is that possible? Okay. While they're figuring that out. Oh, perfect. Thank you. Hi, my name is Lisa Altieri, and I'm the CEO and founder of Climate Solutions Net. And I'd like to thank RELX for inviting me to join today. And it's very exciting to be in a room talking about the SDGs. My graduate work was in environment and development economics, and my dream was to go do work abroad in environment development projects locally. And that never happened, but it's always been something that's been near and dear to my heart. So I'm going to talk about empowering people on climate solutions. So if any of you saw the recent report, the new update on where we're at in relation to our 1.5 degree goal, it's a tough read. And so we are far behind our science-based goals, both clearly in the US at the national level, but also globally with the Paris country commitments that we have. We have got to look for alternative pathways in addition to policy to really move us forward to the planet that we need to have as soon as possible. And so one of the opportunities that we have that's emerging now that has the potential to make a huge impact on our ability to meet our goals and move solutions forward is in empowering individuals around the solutions pathway. Oops, where am I pointing it? Towards you or? Sorry. Oh, next slide. Okay, great. So we are in a very important moment right now. 40% of US emissions come from basic household activities in the areas of electricity use, home heating, transportation, food, and waste. And that is a similar percentage in countries, depending upon which country you're looking at. It may be a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. But individual basic household activities have a big impact on climate. As of basically about now, we now have affordable and accessible solutions coming online for all 5 of those basic household categories of activities that are becoming affordable and accessible. This is a really important moment because that was not the case 5 years ago. This was not the case 10 years ago, but it is now. And not only can families and households choose these actions and lower their impact significantly, they can also generally save money in the process, create local jobs, improve their health by improving the local air quality, and in generally be a real big part of helping create the future that we all really want to see. So next slide. However, although these solutions are coming online and available for people to make these choices, people are not aware of the solutions. So here in the US, according to Yale research, 70% of Americans believe that climate change is happening and they're concerned and they want to help, but they have no idea what to do. They don't know what the solutions pathway looks like. They don't know what their household impact looks like and where it's coming from. They don't know what choices and actions that they can make to help. And if you gave them a list of 5 actions, they would have no idea which one was more important. So our mission and our goal with this platform, our tech solution, is to empower people on solutions. Our goal is to make it simple, easy, and fun for people to learn about solutions and what they can do, and most importantly, connect them to work together in community so that they are motivated to take action. So that is the question, and I kind of just gave you the answer. But how do we empower people? What actually works? What moves the needle forward? So let's see, next slide. Simple, easy, and fun. So I participated in this. I did this on the ground in my own community. So I live in the city of Palo Alto. Back in 2007, the city of Palo Alto did their first climate action plan. And one of the first things they did after that was kind of unusual. It's not what cities normally do. They held a community meeting, and they brought us together and they said, hey, we just did a climate action plan. This was a new thing because they were one of the first cities that did it. And so they said, here's our emissions and where they're coming from, and here's some of the city policies we're thinking about doing. Here's the goal that we're taking to council. But in order to get there, we need your help. And so they didn't come to us with a program. They came to us with an ask. They said, we want to create teams across the community to work on lowering our emissions in different segments. We want a team for businesses and a team for schools and a team for government, a team for Stanford, because it's right there, and then a few others, and then they wanted a team for residents. So I was so excited that they were asking us to participate. I'm like, I'm in. So I volunteered to lead the residential effort in my own backyard. And our mission, given to us by the city, was to go get people who live in our community to take individual and household actions to lower their impact towards our community-wide goals. So I did this on the ground for 5 years, and we had a bunch of volunteers. We ended up with, I think, 30 or 40 before we closed out the program at 5 years later. That were dedicated to getting in there and making events happen. We did everything from pretty much A to Z, and we had a lot of fun, but we were not making the deep dive that we really needed to make to move the needle on our community emissions. So I started to look at what was working, what wasn't working, where were our barriers, and what would it look like to do a really successful community program to bring our community, our residents, our neighbors into the conversation, get them engaged around action, and really move that needle. And the first thing that I thought of was tech. We were doing this longhand. We were organizing on the ground, grassroots organizers, right? It's extremely effective. We saw things working, but it was really time intensive, and it was really difficult to scale. So the first thing I thought was, what do we need here? We need some tech, because what is tech really good at? Tech's good at providing access and disrupting by bringing people together and making things visible and available. So that's what we did. We went out and built a platform that is a tool to enable communities to engage at the residential, at the neighborhood, individual household level towards these community goals, and to come together as a community and really move the needle on carbon emissions. And I mentioned that 40% of US emissions are in these household categories. For most cities, it's 50% or more. So it's the larger cities that have a smaller percentage, but most of the average cities that we have, most of those, other than the really big cities, most of them are 50% or more of these emissions are coming from these categories. So getting folks in the community together to work on this can have a huge impact. Okay, next slide. So I mentioned that we saw some things that were working. The two things that we saw were working first was providing information. Most people want to help, they don't know what to do. Providing them really good information about actions is really important. But that's actually not what we saw for the most part moving the needle. What moved the needle was the social connections. When folks were chatting with their neighbors about the actions they were thinking about taking, talking about what contractor they use for their heat pump water heater install, working in small teams, working in community groups like high school or a faith community or a senior community or a sports club. When we started to bring these community groups to work together, we saw traction. When we ran Community Challenge, we saw people get engaged. So the social aspect is the most important part of empowering people. So our site, just really quickly, it's community-based. We're launching nationally early next year, and wherever anyone goes to participate in this challenge, they'll be working with a site that has local information, local branding, local photos, and it will feel like it's built for them. Really important when you're engaging people is make it personal, make it relatable, make it something that they can connect to that makes sense in their lives. In our site, throughout the whole site, it's positive, it's focused on creating this vision of the future that we can all create together. It's focused on the solutions, and it's focused on all the things that will happen if we take these actions that are positive. So, next slide. So, really quickly, we help them discover their impact. We help them see how they relate to others. What does my impact look like in my household compared to my city, the US, the UK, China, and India? We want to help provide perspective. We also educate about equity in the text that we have on the site, about how the impacts are not equal. Next slide. And of course, those are in tons CO2e. And then we also help them find actions that are right for their household. We have just right now just under 70 actions. And the real benefit of having a lot of actions is that we can meet people where they are in their household. So if they are a low-income household and they're challenged and some of the bigger actions are tough, there are still actions that they can do. And one of our big focuses with this platform, once we launch nationally, will be to look at how can we bring resources in through this platform and get it out to residents across the spectrum, including, and very importantly, low-income and frontline communities where we can help provide resources coming in, like possibly funding to help support a new community garden in a food desert, or free light bulbs to come in and help folks change things out. So we're helping connect them. Next slide. And actually, that's what I just referred to. So hooking them up with resources. We make it really easy on our site for them to just get connected right away into those resources that can help them take these actions and get them, go all the way from I want to do this to I completed this. Next slide. And then also, most importantly on here, is we connect people to help each other out. We say to them, help each other be successful. So we provide a way for them to chat with each other, talk about what they're doing, ask a question, their neighbor can answer it, they can post a tip like a contractor or a particular product that worked for them, so they can actually create this knowledge base and help each other actually get to success with these actions. And then finally, one more slide. Okay. So, and most importantly, as I said, working together in communities. So all the communities that they can work with a small team, they can work with a community group or geographically with their neighborhood. All of those on the site have a way to track their progress together, chat with each other together, and to help move this forward. And then one more slide. Thank you. Next slide, please. Oh, perfect. Sorry. Great. So as I mentioned, we're piloting right now in 20 cities across the U.S. from Hawaii to Virginia. We're planning on a national launch early next year. And then once we get the U.S. up and running, we're going to go global. So we're going to set this out globally, track progress, put up dashboards to track nationally as well as track internationally. And our mission is within 5, max 10 years, when you ask someone on the street what the solutions to climate change are, they won't say solar ? Or I don't know, which is what they do now. They'll say, oh yeah, they're this, 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 and this, and I've done these 3. That's our goal. The final slide, please. So thank you very much for the time.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shali Shankar, and I'm the founder of AIM Partners. We invest in, that's not me, so maybe best if people don't get confused that I'm with John Deere. So I'm founder of AIM Partners, and we invest in companies that are building technologies that are solving some of the more complex social and environmental problems. So these are typically very disruptive technologies. And 7 years ago, when we started doing this work, we were warned by everybody saying, you're getting into a new space, you're going to have problems having access to a good pipeline. You'd not be able to demonstrate that it's possible to have returns as well as create an impact, and the list went on and on and on. Ironically, pipeline was not an issue. Being able to generate top quartile returns wasn't an issue. Being able to demonstrate impact wasn't an issue. The biggest issue was it took a lot of our time and energy to define what we were doing. Impact investing, double bottom line, triple bottom line. Every conversation we started, at least a quarter of the conversation was taken up by that. So when the SDG goals were announced, we were thrilled, and we felt like there was a common language we could reuse. So now when we walk into a meeting, it's like, you know about those SDG goals? Let's move on. Let's tell you what we are working on. And we invest in very early stage companies that sometimes need a lot of traction and a lot of hand-holding. And these are typically not easier to fund software solutions. These are companies that may have a hardware component, a huge component of R&D, scaling, testing, adoption in communities. And they typically have very well-funded incumbents that they have to go against. So from that perspective, it's also been easier to use the SDG framework and to outline that these are very complex problems that need complex solutions or solutions that need a lot of capital. So it's also been a good convening place to bring a lot of players. Because a lot of capital is needed, we've also started bringing in a lot of players to the table. So we create stacks of capital based on the risk of a company, stage of a company. We bring different partners, and we bring together and aggregate not only different types of risk capital from our investors, but we also bring together partners like government agencies, corporations, local governments, as well as federal governments, and trying to bring all resources to the table to be able to solve some of these problems. We'd always had a systemic view of problem solving, like let's look across the entire system before we invest in these disruptive technologies to solve problems. And the framework has been very good to see because it has been very helpful because we are focused on issues like hunger or food security. And food security typically has been associated with food and agriculture. And one of the issues we honed in was that 50% of the people in most developing countries depend on seafood for their primary protein. So from that perspective, we've made an investment in a company that's trying to see how will we feed the people, 3 billion to be very precise, who are dependent on seafood right now, 20 years from now when we run out of seafood. So taking the system-wide perspective has also helped us bring different players, and it has also helped us force people to come together out of their silos. One of the other things we've seen is that it's pretty hard to build these companies. It takes a lot of effort. So we've also been able to bring more and more people around the table and encourage them to see that the spray and pray model, which works for a lot of sometimes other companies, where you spray a lot of capital into different companies and hope something will work, has not realistically worked or will work in this space. So from that perspective also, the call of action that SDGs has created has made it really easier for us to reach out to people and say, we are looking to solve this very specific problem. Will you come around the table? And despite the boxes, it's been wonderful to see how people have come together and worked together. When we're doing diligence on companies, we place a lot of emphasis on the unintended consequences that could happen if any of these investments did go awry. And because they're technologies, because they grow pretty quickly, they can also have the equally negative impact. So from that perspective, one of the more recent examples was that we were looking at an investment which was purely in the area of reducing emissions when we grow crops. So this company is able to grow crops using 50% less water and also 0% pesticides and 0% fertilizers. And the feedback was, well, this is going to compete with traditional agriculture, and how will you compete and how will you do that? And they're just connecting the lines and saying, we need to go to coastal cities which are interested in the issue of ag runoff and algae blooms and all the others, and they would be the first to adopt. So we're also finding that it's easier to bring to the table when we use that. After we make investment in companies, we typically take board seats or board observer roles. And there we found it really useful to use this tool again to bring people to the table. For one instance, one question I typically ask when companies hiring new talent is to say, were there any minority candidates in the pool? And the question is, well, there are no minority candidates here. So it's like, okay, would you ever consider doing a scholarship? Would you ever consider providing a summer internship? Would you ever consider just mentoring people who may eventually end up here? So I think we feel like in the long time ago, like 7 years ago, when you went into a room and you were a technology investor, people got a little unhappy when you started talking about diversity issues. issues, or you started talking about ag runoff because it's just a technology play. So, but now I feel like it's giving everybody an imperfect, but still a talking space where we can all sing from the same sheet of music. So a lot more work needs to happen. We still continue to be divided and do our own thing. But I feel like as an investor who for the last 7 years has been trying to struggle, like how do we define what we are doing? This has been a great way to start partnering with others. So thank you for inviting me to speak.
Great. I am from Blue River Technology and John Deere actually now. The reason I was invited is we are a company that is working on sustainability. We were until very recently a startup. We were acquired by John Deere about a year ago. And I believe the reason I was invited to speak here is because we're working on problems of agriculture and sustainability and using technology, and we are doing tech for good is what I believe. So using high technology to solve world pressing problems is the title of the presentation I have for you today. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about is in the case of agriculture, which is a primary activity around the world and involve actually quite a bit on solving problems such as hunger, such as poverty, such as sustainability, very, very big impact on those. And the way to think about agriculture is as a dynamic system. Agriculture has been changing and will continue to change over the years. We didn't use, if you think about the scale of human development, we didn't use tractors, for example, for a long time. We didn't use chemicals in agriculture until the 50s. We didn't use fertilizers in a large scale. We didn't use herbicides in large scale, but we now do. We didn't use biochemicals. We didn't use GMOs until about 20 years ago, but we now do. In the quest of producing more, we've been innovating quite fast. The world has been innovating quite fast, and I believe that something that is going to remain a constant is this a state of change. Agriculture is going to continue to change, and I believe that in particular the next stage that has already started is using digital technologies in agriculture. And let me tell you a little bit about more of that, because I believe that in using those we can help a lot of the goals we have around sustainability, around the area of producing food in a more sustainable way, in a way that we can continue to do it in years to come. This is how most of agriculture is done in the advanced world. Big machine sprayer sprays this blanket of herbicides over everything. Some of it lands on the weeds, which is designed to kill. That chemical is designed to kill weeds. Some of it lands on top of the soil where it does not do much. It just gets, with the next rain, it gets run off to the stream. And some of it lands in the crops that we end up harvesting. And that there it doesn't do much either, because the crops have been genetically modified to resist that chemical, right? So it's this is the way that agriculture is done in the advanced world, the modern world, and we believe that a lot of it is not very efficient. It's very wasteful. On the contrary, we're using a lot of chemicals to cover every square inch, where only a small percentage of the field is done by the weeds. Is occupied by the weeds. I don't know if there's a way of pointing, but that where my mouse is there, that big plant is a weed. These things in rows are crops. So those don't need the herbicide, yet they're receiving it. The problem with this is several-fold. Aside from sustainability, from wasted inputs and chemistry getting into our food chain, a big problem is that nature is also not making this technology not sustainable. And a big area is this, what is called the weed resistance. Weeds are now being called super weeds, have become resistant to the chemicals that we've been using over and over and over again. If you use the same chemical to kill a weed, it just becomes resistant, similar to what is happening with antibiotics and resistance to I don't know, step throat now is a big problem, because there's a few antibiotics that cure it. So It just happens. Nature adapts. Survival is very well ingrained in nature, and weeds have become resistant to the chemicals we've been using. And in particular, this is a big problem because we're limited to about 3 chemicals, or exactly 3 chemicals that we can use that kill the weeds without killing the crops. These are the chemicals that the world has genetic modifications for. One is called Roundup, glyphosate, another one is called glyphosate or Liberty, and the other one is called dicamba, which is a chemical by Monsanto that is the newest one and is probably the most problematic. But the weeds have become resistant to all of them. In fact, here's a map of the United States. By the way, this is a world problem, but here's a map of the United States where there's pretty good data that shows how many plant species, or weed species rather, are resistant to these 3 chemicals that we can use. And you can see it evolving over time on how many weed species are resistant to this. It's an exponential problem, as we were talking about in SDGs, right? It's a complex problem. It's an exponential problem. Every plant that is not killed by the herbicide produces somewhere between 100 and 100,000 seeds that are then all resistant to this herbicide, so they don't die when they use the same method. So sustainability is about being able to do the same thing you've been doing in the future. And clearly, when you have resistance and the weed's not dying, it's not possible. And the problem is not that the herbicides don't exist that kill those weeds. Is that the 3 that there's genetic modifications don't kill those weeds. So, now the best solution that the world has is, well, let's create a 4th genetic modification and pair it with a 4th chemical that we can use. And now, on top of using the 3 chemicals that we're using, let's use this 4th chemical. So it's more chemicals and more waste, and that's a problem. That's not the best way of approaching it. In contrast, what we've been doing at Blue River Technology for the last 7 years is we've been developing that machine, that white piece of machine that you see being pulled by a tractor. The machine looks at the plants as it goes and recognizes which ones are weeds and which ones are crops, and it sprays only the weeds and not the crops and not the bare ground. So you can see that little shower. I don't know if it showed well there, but it showers the weeds as it detects them, and it does it. There's a very slow video. The machines go at around 8 miles per hour now, and soon to be, our goal is to go at 15 miles per hour, and we hope to do that by next year. So instead of spraying everything, we spray only the weeds and only where they're needed. We do that by using machine learning, computer vision techniques. We take an image of the field that you can see there in your right. We then use artificial intelligence to detect which ones are crops, which ones are weeds. This is very similar to technologies that are being used, for example, on Facebook. When you put up a picture of your friend, they can say, hey, this is Fred, this is Jake King, this is, and they can do it very fast. Using the same technologies and computing that is in the machine that you saw, that white machine, we're able to detect the crops, detect the weeds, and detect when there's nothing. And you can see there in the left, we spray only the weeds. You can see that a lot of the area is actually not sprayed, which is actually precisely the point. You only spray the weeds. In doing so, we reduce the chemical use by about 90%, herbicide use by about 90%. Just to give you a little bit of a sense, I was talking with a farmer about 5,000 acres in corn. He was saying that they spray about $250,000 worth of chemicals every year, of herbicides every year. And what I was telling him is, gee, yeah, we can reduce that by a factor of 10. So that's a very big payoff if we do it. So sustainability doesn't need to mean that is not contrary to profitability or to savings or to self-paying for this investment. We also can reduce the cost of, potentially the cost of seed by providing alternatives to GMOs. If we're not spraying the crop, we don't need the GMO, the modification, the genetic modification that allows the weeds to be resistant to the weeds. And as I was saying, more importantly, we are allowed to use a lot more chemistry, some of which is much more sustainable than the chemistry we're using, and use these chemical alternatives so that we can fight weed resistance by changing the chemicals. There's about 100 different herbicides that are active in the world, that are used in the world. but only about 3 get used in modern agriculture. And since the reason that we only use 3 is because if you spray any of the other 100, you kill the weed and the crop, right? But if you use this method, you only are spraying the weed, so the crop is safe. So you're not limited to the 3 chemicals that are overused in agriculture. So that's very, very powerful. So reduce the amount of chemicals, potentially have alternatives to seeds that are less expensive, and a more sustainable way of combating weeds. This is going a little bit about to what we do. We create what is called smart machines, and they are machines that in general sense, decide using artificial intelligence, act in a very local way, and then verify what they did. And we are very good at bringing technologies like computer vision, machine learning, deep learning, robotics. These are technologies that are pretty cutting-edge technologies that the Silicon Valley is very good at, and we put them to work towards sustainability, towards good goals. So I am a firm believer that we are doing technology for good. It's not just technology for technology's sake. I tell new recruits that are considering joining Blue River as, hey, you can use this machine learning AI to create spam filters, or to I don't know, sell more ads, or whatever that I don't know, big tech is doing these days. Or you can use it to solve a real problem that the world has that needs an urgent solution. And I think it's a very appealing proposition for especially for young people. A lot of the people that are working on machine learning and computer vision, these are pretty new techniques, and a lot of them are very young, millennials, very big on and very connected to sustainability, and they want to have an impact, and that argument works really well. And this is, maybe just to finish, this is what the company looks like, biased towards young age, as I was saying, a lot of very smart people. And we were, as I was saying, we had pretty good success, and as a result of that, we were acquired by John Deere about a year ago. So very happy to be now part of John Deere and be able to, through John Deere, through their machinery, scale up the impact that we can have. So if you can think about the impact that a startup can have with limited distribution, with limited manufacturing capabilities, versus working with being part of the #1 manufacturer of agricultural equipment, now it's much bigger. So that's it, and that's a little bit on Blue River. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you. So starting in about a half hour, there's a reception upstairs with food and beverages. So our job is to not delay you from getting to that. My name's Neil Chase. I'm the editor of the Mercury News here in San Jose. And what we have here is 5 people who are business leaders at RELX, people who work for a large corporation, but actually are all entrepreneurs. What struck me in reading the bios is that they all are people who built a business that became part of this larger business, not unlike your story with John Deere. So I'm going to ask them each to share just quickly who they are, what part of the business they run, what they do in their business. Then we'll talk a little bit about how their business units can interact with the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think we'll just start and run down the line.
All right, great. Yeah, I'm Matt Waits. In February of this year, we sold our business SST Software to RELX Group and became part of their agricultural division called ProAgrica. SST was a company focused on precision agriculture, meaning that we worked with agronomists and their farmer customers to capture field and subfield geospatial data and use that to make fertilizer recommendations that vary across the field, help select the right seeds for the right soil types, and that kind of thing.
Okay. Right.
Hey everybody, I'm Frank Terrell. I'm here with Threat Metrics. We, like you, Matt, became part of the family in February. We became part of the LexisNexis Risk Solutions Group, which is an organization that deals in large amounts of data. And what we have is an enormous digital identity network that's global and helps us authenticate people across the globe using digital technologies.
Okay. Josh.
Josh Becker, One Super Slide. Thanks. I'm a user of Lisa's solution, leading the city of Menlo Park, and known Shai for a long time as a leader on these investing for impact. So great fun to have great folks here. I am with Lex Machina, so ran for 7 years, and now the chairman. And sure, we'll get into this. But we started actually as a public interest project at Stanford, so it's really around openness and transparency for law. And could we use algorithms? Could we use data to mine through millions of lawsuits and extract out information about judges, attorneys, parties? Initially for folks that were trying to get transparency around patent law, and now expanding into many other areas of law. And we've been running for about 7 years, and we've been part of Lex for about 3 years now.
Excellent.
Hey everyone, I'm Nick. Like Josh, we were acquired by LexisNexis, the legal side, and one of the founders of a company called Ravel Law. What we do, unlike what Josh does, is we look at legal language and we try to make trends and patterns out of language. So can we tell an attorney what the sentence a judge is most likely to use in responding to their brief based on what they've written historically? So we set off on that path about 8 years ago, starting at Stanford Law School, and then starting my own company, running that for a while. It's been about 1.5 years since we were acquired by Lexis. I work with a number of you in the room here, so it's fun to see everyone together today. One little anecdote that isn't known is Daniel and I, who we started the company together, actually became friends working on a rule of law project at Stanford, writing textbooks for students in Afghanistan. So, doing good things for rule of law can lead to all kinds of outcomes.
Excellent. JG?
Press, also known as the Berkeley Electronic Press. And I've been with the press for 14 years. They were acquired by Elsevier 14 months ago. And what does Press do? We help universities publish their own scholarship. So that's what we do, open access.
Okay. I mean, it strikes me, as somebody who's reported on a lot of companies and don't know your company better than others, many companies acquire many other companies and immediately squash them and move them into the company and eliminate the founders and get rid of the name. And you seem to be a company full of people who are still operating their businesses within that corporate shell, which is either idiotic or brilliant management. I'm guessing it's brilliant from what I'm seeing. But that probably ties into the fact that as entrepreneurs and as founders, you do have a sense of trying to serve some goals other than the profit of the company's bottom line. You're working with universities, maybe more of a nonprofit or in some cases lower profit world, not as much these days. Some of you are working with large corporate customers who are all about the bottom line. How do you work sustainability into a business like that? How do you keep your entrepreneurial sense of wanting to do something good in a larger corporate environment? Any of you?
To your question about sustainability, well, the universities, in our case, the universities, why are they publishing scholarship open access? They want the branding, they want the recognition, they want to get credit for their intellectual output. So they're making all of this scholarship freely available. And now I think we have 500 million downloads of scholarship that's been made freely available. So what is the goal? What do? We sell software as a service to universities. That's what we do. And what are they doing? They're giving away that scholarship because it benefits them. So it's almost there aren't competing interests by doing well, they do well.
So you don't have to cause sustainability to happen in your business, you're simply fueling it. Yeah. You just show up for work and you're contributing to the goals. That's easier. I assume it's harder for some of you.
I mean, it's interesting. The threat metrics perspective is, we play in the digital world, right? In a mobile-first digital world, you know, the imperatives of poverty reduction and education and those kinds of things that are part of the SDGs can't happen unless you have inclusion, right? Fast forward 20 years from now, if you're not in the digital world, you're excluded from the global economy. So our world is about how do you authenticate people in a digital, mobile-first world, so they have complete access to financial products and capital markets and education and information and those things necessary to allow them to function effectively. So it's kind of an imperative that's a function of authenticating people. And so our view is a little bit different. I mean, our view is, I need to be able to know anonymously so I don't violate privacy rights, but that this individual interacting with this website or this application on a mobile phone is in fact a real individual that behaves in some normal and non-anomalous way on the internet, and be able to allow that individual then have access to things to be authenticated them. So.
And is it, this may be an ignorant assumption, is it harder in a company, in a country that doesn't have a history of credit reporting and things like that? I mean, do you have to create the infrastructure to have that even happen?
Sure. I mean, imagine, I was talking to Felix, who's doing work in Nigeria, and you know, talking about the kind of the electrical grid and access to power. Imagine a thin file customer by definition is somebody who you go to the credit bureau and there's not a lot there. Well, what happens in countries where there is no credit bureau?
Right.
Right. And where I can look at somebody and say, hey, you know, this individual's applying for a microloan to start a business that's potentially transformational to them, because now I can get some capital, I can start a business, I can change my family, you know, kind of journey. But I have no way of authenticating whether that person's real or not. But what if threat metrics can say, hey, you know what, this person tops up their phone every month for the last 10 years, you know, their mobile phone, and that in and of itself, that behavior is predictive of creditworthiness.
That's their entire credit history, right? It's the only electronic transaction
So
they have.
You disintermediate the concept of traditional physical records, and you replace it with online behavior becomes a determinant of whether or not you provide credit. And that's pretty powerful.
So you have to go in and look at the community and identify what that identity metric might be.
Absolutely. And that identity metric is dynamic. It gets informed constantly. As your behavior changes, that association gets kind of factored into the identity. So in that sense, inclusion for us is there needs to be a mechanism where, as you fast forward years from now, the way we authenticate to the global economy is through these mobile devices and understanding behavior online.
And the way you help your customers is by getting more people authenticated. So it's in your interest to get as many people engaged with the economy as you can. So again, the business is in line with the goals. Yeah.
Make 2 points. One to your question about sticking around. I think that's really an attribute, it's a tribute to these entrepreneurs, but it's really an attribute of mission-driven businesses, right? You know, when we talked about Blue River, we're saying, you know, if it was an ad company, we got bought, well, maybe we'll go out and make ad stuff elsewhere. But if they really believe in the mission, then they stick around. And I think we've seen that in these companies. I know our company, people are very driven by this mission of openness and transparency. Well, we call legal analytics. We can now create that category. Great, we did it for patent law, we want to do it for all of law. And people want to stick around, you know, to do that. The second point, as relates to the goal, so Mike Walsh, so Alexis talks about the 4 pillars of rule of law, and one of those is transparency, right? And so to have true rule of law, then you have to have transparency in the legal system. And unfortunately, even here in the US, you don't have a lot of transparency, right? It's very hard. The stuff that we do, actually, we still do at the federal level. California is very, very difficult to actually get documents from. So eventually,
we've noticed in the journalism business, yes.
Yes. And very expensive. So for us just to buy 3 years of documents in LA County, just know it would be $5 million, right? Which is like, that's before.
But if you buy them, I can get them with my subscription to LexisNexis, so I prefer that you do buy them.
Yes. And then we do our stuff on top of it. But, you know, so, but really it's about that transparency to law, right? And yes, we do want to do that in California.
And so, I mean, obviously, California is a difficult place to get public records, but then you start into the same conversation about identity metrics. You're then, if you're with this company, you're going global. You're looking at countries where there hasn't been a rule of law, or the documentation's not there, or do you sort of take every country and try to evaluate it and figure out how to bring the same thought there?
What we do is very in-depth. Like, it takes us, you know, kind of 6 to 9 months to launch the next area of law, you know, one subject matter, copyright, trademark. So we're not going to national yet. We've had lots of requests, but we have a lot to do here in the US first.
Got it.
But I'd say, Lexis itself does do a lot of that. They've actually worked on like codifying like law that was sort of in a drawer somewhere and actually publishing the rule of law in
for the first time.
Like Fiji and Maldives and a bunch of these countries. So
okay.
There is some interesting stuff that people probably here know more about than I do, but there is some good stuff that happens.
Yeah. So actually, maybe to build on that, so one of one of the things that we did when we started Rabble that was a little bit different is we needed access to case law, which are opinions written by judges. And it turns out it's pretty hard to get access to, and there are companies like Lexus that have a big trove of it, but otherwise it's not really readily available and out there. And so we had to partner with Harvard Law School and digitize their entire case law collection. So
wow.
We took 40,000 books, put them through a guillotine and a high-speed digital scanner, and then turn that into data that we were able to mine. And the cool thing is, and so, per your earlier question about, sustainability and what that means as a founder, I'd almost say, and I think we could all speak to it as startup founders, actually running a startup isn't sustainable at all, both, neither, for lots of reasons.
Good point.
Personal health being one of them.
Good point.
And so actually it's, I think, in joining and being part of a company like RELX, which I was on a call recently, somebody said it was like 400 and something odd years since the company has existed in one form or another, you can actually be much more sustainable. And so we started with this Harvard case law collection, and I'm working with Danny in the audience here and others. We've been talking to Cuba about doing a similar initiative. So it turns out, if you think it's hard to get case law in the United States, go to Cuba and try to find out where the law sits today. It's super difficult.
Wow.
So I think providing access like that already, it helps the rule of law. Without access, without transparency, how can you have law?
Wow, fascinating. One of the things we talked about earlier today was storytelling, getting the message out, right? Obviously, there are people in this room who can name every one of the SDGs by number and tell you what they are, and it's a little secret code, right? I'm working on number 16. Most people barely know what they are outside of the group of people who are working on them, and I know there were several million people involved in the original conversations about them, but how do you start to get the word out? This is an information company. You all do it in very different ways. Is there a role for this company in educating people and getting the message out and trying to get people to think about the goals and how they can plug into them?
Yeah, I think there is. I mean, I'm one that doesn't know much about SDGs. I mean, this has been an eye-opening day for me. And but like was mentioned, in agriculture, the kinds of things we do in precision agriculture just line up with sustainability goals. It's, nobody wants to conserve water and fertilizer and seed more than the farmer himself. So it makes good business sense. But one thing we do struggle with in agriculture is how to measure sustainability. It's been talked about for 20 years. There's various efforts out there. Every big company's got a sustainability department that at least gets things published into their shareholder communications. But I think in agriculture, for one, we really struggle with what does that mean and how do you create measurable benchmarks. And that is something that we're thinking about. It's something
Is it an education issue? I mean, at some point you decide we're going to take this model and explain that to our customers and see if we can get that to catch on?
Yeah, I think so. I think one thing that I've noticed is that the consumer is finally conscious of it, and that that's what's really starting to propel it in.
So your customers' customers now paying attention.
That people in the grocery store want to know about where their food came from and are willing to pay a premium for it, and that is starting to really change the behavior of food companies and therefore grain buyers, and trickles down to the farmers.
And so the farmers need more information from you.
We need to create ways to become very quantitative about what it is, what are the benchmarks, what are the things that we're measuring. So we've still got a little ways to go there.
Our world's a little different. The forcing function for us is that education and expanded market are tied to the profit imperative, right? So our customers who themselves have customers. We're B2B2C. So if you go to a global bank and go, hey, right now Latin America's underserved, Africa's underserved, what would it mean to you if 5% of that market could be tapped for you? So they've got a profit imperative to go, how do we deploy these technologies and include, and be more inclusive? Because that's going to help them, right? So you have this kind of interesting juxtaposition of the profit imperative moving them there, and at the same time them realizing I've got to make these investments in infrastructure and technologies because we have real people there who can become consumers and lifetime consumers. So we haven't really found a challenge in educating people. It's more an issue of timing and resources and trust, developing trust. Our world, the only currency that matters online is trust. Right? Can I really trust that individual? So unlike maybe in your world, Matt, where there's kind of more of the consumer and maybe a groundswell where the person down on the street has to really be interested. In our world, it's the opposite. The provider, the supply chain, if you will, is immensely motivated to expand their market by going to these opportunities. And the question is, how do you get them there in a way that allows them to conduct business in a way that's profitable, and at the same time give them that opportunity to expand markets?
Yeah, and in my business, the only asset we have is the trust of our readers.
Yeah.
Is there a question or two from the folks here for these folks? Anything you want to know about the company's approach? What do you, yeah.
You mentioned the word trust. And we're talking about the exponential increase in capabilities of technology. And we're talking about more and more powerful technology to utilize greater volume of data and do more things with it, bring your solution that we're trying to accomplish to bear greater capacity to make it work. Make it work more in refined ways. What concerns me is that we have a society that's based on people are consumers. We want them to be consumers so they buy our products, make a profit, so we can keep doing the business we do. The question in terms of trust is, as the technology lets us be more and more able to influence people, some of the scandals about social networking, things like that, as the technology allows us to take into account more information about me or whoever, to approach me as a consumer with a more and more compelling, more and more convincing, more and more high relationship, the person called me on the phone, they were a really great person. I don't know they're a bot anymore.
So how do I maintain trust with you while I get creepier and creepier with how much I know about you?
Yeah, where do you draw the line?
Yeah.
When the consumers are just, as far as they know, everything is working great, they're giving all their money to the company.
Sure.
When it's actually ripping them off or actually, manipulating them beyond what they're capable of even resisting as ordinary people.
Right.
How do we draw the line between, that's over the line. We don't want to do that as a society. The kind of things you're doing today, well, that's pretty good, but
no, it's a good question.
Today's okay, day after tomorrow's
Yep.
not allowable. How do we draw that line and define
Sure.
it in such a way?
Sure. Thank you. We only got a couple minutes left, so let me ask you guys to jump in and address that. As you think about your relationship with your customers and that exact issue, right? How do you maintain that customer trust when things are changing so fast?
Let me take a crack at it from our perspective. I think the reality is there's a movement afoot on what's called sovereign identity. And what's happening in the world is people are saying, hey, my identity is my identity. I should inform it, control it. Other people are saying the government should control it. And there's this juxtaposition between, how do you allow, 185 or 200 different governments, however many there are today, to define identities? Or how do you allow commercial interests that are being, rewarded for using them? And how does the individual play in that? And so I think as a company, RELX together, and ThreatMetrix certainly as part of the family, we've imposed on ourselves some restrictions. So for example, in our world, we authenticate, we don't sell, we just as a vision do not sell marketing data, we don't use anything for marketing. And we're transparent with our customers about that. In our world, we anonymize it. We've blinded ourselves to the data. So if you went to a ThreatMetrix server today and tried to look up Frank Terrell, you're going to get this hashed sequence that means nothing to anybody. And we're transparent with that. So we use technology and we use kind of self-imposed restrictions to say what we want as a vision is to be a trusted steward of data that's neither manipulated by outside sources nor dictated to by governments. And here's what's cool about that approach. At the end of the day, the beauty of anonymity in data is it removes selection bias. So if somebody comes to me and says, I want to apply for a loan, right, based on their internet behavior, I don't make judgments based on their status, based on their ethnicity, based on their religiosity. I mean, I'm completely impartial to that. I'm simply making a decision, not me, my customer, based on data that informs that credit decision that has no other input to it. And so we view that as a really huge force multiplier in the world because all of a sudden selection biases are gone. You start to level the playing field. And as you get more and more access to technology, as we authenticate more and more people to financial products and information, right, you are this neutral arbiter with no objective other than to provide info. But it's work, and it's self-imposed restrictions, and it's not just contractual restrictions. It's taking the time and energy to literally design a framework where we cannot undo it. We don't know what the data is, right?
And then to let people know that you're doing that, so they're going to trust you, right?
That's right.
On that note, I think we have to wrap up. One more? Okay. My timekeeper says one more question.
So my name is Michelle Avers, and I've been very involved in having the SDGs become embedded into the lifeblood of how San Jose works. And I've been doing that for quite a few years. So I'm noticing that we have a group of white American males up here, and yet we're talking about the SDGs. So as the generator of working conversations, I'd just like to ask you to take his question and go a little further and say, can you do a little thinking in real time and say, how could you bring your company into the game of the SDGs, not by looking at how it aligns already, but what can you do, and answer whoever's willing to take the challenge to answer right now. What can you do to expand your personal capacity to understand more about the SDGs? What can you do to bring who you're working with into more awareness about the SDGs and the impact it has? And what can you see you can do to bring the conversation, the SDGs, into what you're doing? Thank you to the two of you for taking the question on, but I would assert that you kind of avoided it and say, not my job. So I'm asking you to take it on as if it is your job, and think right now if there's something you can take on right now or ponder as to what you could do to bring that in.
I'll answer the question. So I want to first start by talking about the question you asked about which ones do we use, 1 through 17. Do we use them in the company? No, I don't. I don't, and I don't think I would, because it doesn't matter to us. So what matters to our organization is what culture we set and what are the values we decide to work with together. And we work a lot on that kind of thing. What are the values we care about? So that's it doesn't matter to us. So I understand that we need a common language within the SDG community to talk about what we want to talk about, but it doesn't matter to me. It's not my community. Okay. But the topics matter, the subjects matter, and the way it matters to us is in terms of how we work together as a company. That's my first part. Specifically to women, so a year ago, I had nothing but women as all my managing positions. So engineering, sales, customer service, marketing, operations, all women. It wasn't done because I had a goal to find the women to do so. It happened to be that's what I had. And so, and it worked wonderfully. And so I don't set it as a goal. It feels artificial for me to set it as a goal. I find the talented people, and the talented people happen to be women at that moment. At this moment, it's majority women, but I don't, this notion of, I understand there are some organizations that would do that, but that hasn't been the way that I would run my organization. It just so happens at times I had all women, and sometimes I have majority women. I don't think I've ever had minority women in manager positions, but that's my organization.
Well, as you all think about some of the conversations that have happened here today, are there things these conversations have prompted in you about something else to address, a different way for you to think about it, either in your business or personally, or some of you've seen what some of the other folks are talking about around some of these goals. Does it change your thinking at all about what your priorities are, or opportunities that you're missing, or different ways to approach what you do?
I have one point on that quickly, Josh. And retention of talent in Silicon Valley and in the Bay Area globally is super tough. And what I do think companies like RELX actually ascribing to values like the SDGs, but doing real meaningful work in, it really does have an impact on our ability to keep talented people and to hire talented people. And so Mike Walsh, who Josh mentioned before, is the CEO of LexisNexis. He came right after we were acquired, and the first thing he did was speak to us for an hour about the rule of law. We have all these guys that are being recruited by every company in the Bay Area, and they walked out, guys and girls. I'm sorry, I used that word plurally, but they walked out, and immediately what they said to me is, this actually could be a company we're super excited to work for a while. And so I think there's value in companies espousing these things and actually taking real action to make them happen through their corporate persona and goals, and we feel that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I think there's stuff we can do within our businesses, and then there's stuff that we can do as individuals as well, right? So, to your question, yeah, I mean, we've been pretty U.S. focused, and this is actually one of, even more directly want to get to the international piece, right? When we can, as soon as we can do that. But also, you know, so 18 years ago, I founded a group called Full Circle Fund, which is a collective grant-making group, and it was really originally started to get young professionals tied in with the Bay Area needs, right? And one thing we started was something called the Founders Pledge. So pledging 1% of, for getting Founders Pledge 1% of the company stock or some percent of their own stock to that if there's a liquidity event, sorry, then that would go to you know, to nonprofits, right, to the community, and you can set aside what that is. And so I took that pledge. We did that when we had our event, and we tried to promote that among other founders, and that, you know, that could be here in the Bay Area, that could be international. But I'd say, you know, that's something that I think, you know, sort of another step in terms of incorporating, you know, some of this in as well. I'd say particularly on diversity in the workforce, Hackbright is an incubator for, it basically takes women with very little or no coding experience and is a boot camp specifically for them. And we've hired 4 people through that, and they've been some of our best engineers and some of the very few engineers we've been able to hire actually here in Silicon Valley, and they've stuck with us, and that's been great.
Quick comment for me, it's interesting. You mentioned earlier that, you know, maybe goal number 18 should be startups being sustainable and staying alive. When you're a startup, you just haven't got the bandwidth or the resources to do this. One of the things that's interesting about combining into a large global organization, as you guys mentioned, Mark, and in our case, our CEO as well, is to say, look, we now have this broader vision about inclusion and wellness and these things we're doing. I look at diversity from another perspective as well. Number one, we live in fear of living in an echo chamber. The last thing we want as leaders is to have, you know, conformity of thought, because it informs our products the wrong way. We start drinking our own Kool-Aid, and it gets really weird. The other thing that we like to do as a company at ThreatMetrics is customer advisory boards, where we let the marketplace dictate, you know, in LATAM, in Africa, in Asia, and EMEA, to come to us and say, here's what matters to us. And so those CABs, those advisory boards, are super important in informing our product direction, our strategy, so it's not a bunch of people in Silicon Valley at the mothership determining what people have to do globally. So I think as a leader, there's an imperative to disrupt conformity of thought, and that's through talent acquisition. We're a global company, so we have people of all ethnicities and genders that are in management leadership positions, but also in the marketplace. How do we use the market to inform our direction in a way that's meaningful to that geography or that people group that may not be something that we see, you know, directly?
Well, great. I think with that, we'll have the last word, and Marcia is going to take us home. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Can you hear me? With the mic? Okay. So actually, I just wanted to remind you that RELX Group is using the SDGs. All of my colleagues here have content through their business units on this site. And it is our way of, again, thinking about our contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals. So we have unwittingly created a showcase for our tools and resources free to the world that can advance knowledge on the SDGs. And if we're all about data and information, and we're about partnerships, let me just show you something very quickly. I had a chance to ask the gentleman who was instrumental in launching the SDGs, former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, this summer about his ideas on the value of information and data to advance the SDGs and the power of partnerships.
you know, there are 17 goals, 169 targets, and 230 indexes. In making sure that the SDGs are all implemented in its entirety, it's important that we need to have various systematic and scientific checking and assessment of the situation. Their information and data can play a very important role. Without knowing how much we are making progress, you will not be able to know where we are going. In the course of consulting with the member states on SDGs, I established a group, high-level panel of scientists, world's best scientists, and also I established one panel of statisticians, so that these statistics and scientific evidences could be used as a way to gauge the level of implementation of sustainable development goals. Therefore, the information and data can play a very important role. Not only in SDGs, in all our activities and visions of the United Nations, partnership is the most essential things which we have to form, establish. Without partnership, there is not a single country or individual, however powerful, however resourceful one may be, there is nothing we can do alone. That's why we must establish a very strong, firm, trilateral partnerships among governments, business communities, and civil societies. This has been my consistent message to the people of the world. So let's try to establish a strong partnership.
So today was all about inspiration, and here's some of the inspiration that I got through the day. I know some of you weren't with us in the morning, but what I heard from Amanda Ellis, former ambassador to the UN for New Zealand, and working with Arizona State University and their sustainability center, she said something about history and herstory, about women being agents of change and development. I heard from Nick Hahn, who is the chair of the Global Grand Challenges of Sustainability for Singularity University, that we need to think about exponential growth. We don't want to be just walking our way when exponential growth is going to be wrapping around the world many times. So innovation, technology is moving quickly, and we need to harness it to address major challenges in the world. What I heard during our expert cafe was all around data, 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 and two applications of that stood out for me. Data and storytelling, and you can apply that into any of the challenges that the SDGs address, particularly as we heard in the expert cafe around climate change, or data and health, about precision, how data can be used to address things like health challenges through precision medicine. During lunch, we had Radhika Shah, the co-president of Stanford's Angels and Entrepreneurs Network. She talked about the negatives that technology can bring, but also the plus. And then we also heard from Professor Sarah Henry, who is working on a center of excellence around gender equity. And what she had to say, which stood out for me, was really about making the bridge between the global north and the global south, and that you can't just add women into the equation and stir. You actually need to be applying a gender lens, both for men and for women, so that what technology brings is really addressing. She gave a very good example that stood out for me about seeds, and some very bright colleagues at the Gates Foundation worked on creating a seed that was resistant to disease, but actually it took 4 times longer to cook it. It was a investment that went nowhere because they hadn't talked to the people who actually cooked it. What I heard from Rosedale was, don't let today's limitations limit thinking about tomorrow's solutions. Lisa, I thought what you had to say was very important in terms of making global goals locally relevant for big impact. Shali, I thought you helped something that actually I heard from Jean-Gabriel about a talking space. So it's a framework, the SDGs, even if we don't think about them being particularly relevant in what we do when our work has an impact on society. And in Jean-Gabriel's work, that certainly is about access to knowledge. I also heard from Jorge that application of artificial intelligence can really address persuasive and pervasive problems in society. And they can be a money saver, but also have a positive effect on things like biodiversity by not needing to use GMO. And then in our business leader panel, I heard again from Jean-Gabriel about proving that access to information and helping universities and researchers to become more proficient in getting knowledge out there. From Frank about creating financial viability, which can have a really big impact on those who otherwise might not have things like credit, or in the developing world, microcredit. So there's big applications for the work that they're doing. From Nick, it's very much about the rule of law and having access to law, and Josh about having transparent access to the law. And then Matt, learning a lot about the languages that we are using on the SDGs today, but identifying about how agriculture, actually that community is very much supportive of saving the environment, but also saving money, how this can marry up for better agriculture. So I just want to invite you all to join us for a reception now on the first floor. Yes, so come and have a celebratory drink and a little bit more conversation. Thank you so much to all of our speakers, to all of you for taking time out of your day. Let me just give you one anecdote. What we really wanted to get out of this was creating opportunities for people to have space to make connections that can be useful. So I mentioned about Radhika and Nick. So it turns out that Nick, in addition to his work with Singularity University and many other things, is going to be launching a new venture, which is about helping people on the ground, particularly in African communities, to get community involvement for expanding ideas. And so his idea is that if you have a good idea and you get 100 people in your community to give you $1 or $2, at that point you can come back to his network and you can get some cash. And when you can scale that and show the community engagement at different levels, then you get even more. And Radhika was saying, well, I know just the person to talk to here in California, and they have connected up, and hopefully if we have a chance to come back and speak again, we'll be able to tell you about how that connection that was made today has yielded something good. And I heard that many times today, that there were many good conversations. That's what this was all about. So thank you once again. Thank you to the RELX team. Thank you to Lindsay of MonPR for helping to make this possible. To all our partners, including the Global Compact, and to the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens, and all the others. And thank you again, and we look forward to staying in touch with you.